When I grew up, there were no computers, and very few people had any idea of an internet. I took inspiration and fancy from the old stories of dragons and fairies and trolls, from the myths and legends of other countries, but being Welsh, also from the Mabinogion. I feel that there's always something in a folk tale to pull you in and immerse you in a magical far-off world, whether you want to remember another time, escape for a few minutes, or share stories that enchanted you with your children or your grandchildren. I want to make sure that you can find a story that will entertain and enrapture you. First of all, I found a story from my home county, Pembrokeshire, and the story is entitled The Fisherman and the Mermaid. Peregrine was a fisherman who lived in a fishing village in Pembrokeshire, and every day, no matter how bad the weather, he went out to sea in a boat to catch the fish by which he made his living. Peregrine loved the sea. He loved it when it was still and quiet and blue, because then it was his friend and treated him with care and gentleness, letting his boat slide smoothly across the mirror of its waters, and letting him fill his nets peacefully with the silver fish that swam in its depths. But he loved it too when it was wild and stormy and black, because then, although it was his enemy trying to swamp his boat and drag him down to the bottom of the ocean, it was an exciting enemy to fight. There were times, of course, when Peregrine was not at all sure he was going to beat the sea in its fighting mood, for many of the fishermen in his village had been drowned. A fisherman's job is often a dangerous one. One day, when the sea was in its friendly mood, Peregrine rowed well out from the shore before throwing his nets over the side of the boat, and then he sat and waited for the nets to fill with fish. Soon he began to haul in his nets. Recently, Peregrine had not been getting big catches, so now he was very pleased when he felt the heavy weight in his hands. "My goodness, I've got a catch here," he said to himself, straining to pull the net over the edge of the boat. Heaving and struggling, he managed to get in the net, and there, lying on the foot of the boat, in the midst of a heap of tiny, slippery fish, was the reason for the weight. Staring up at Peregrine was a beautiful mermaid, the first he had ever seen, although he had often heard about them and occasionally had actually heard them singing when he returned to shore at night. Her green eyes were wide with fright, her long green hair dripped like seaweed to her waist, and her long fish's tail glittered green and blue in the morning sun. "Well," exclaimed Peregrine. Then well, well, and then well again. He wasn't sure what he should do. Surely a mermaid must be a very valuable catch. There was no knowing how much he would get for her in the fish market. Certainly no fisherman he had ever known had caught a mermaid in his net. On the other hand, she was too big to handle, and he could hardly treat her as he would any ordinary fish. She wasn't human, it was true, but neither was she wholly fish. While he was worrying about this problem, the mermaid suddenly spoke, and her voice was like music you can hear when you put a shell to your ear, like the waves on the shore, like little rock pools on the beach, like sea anemones, like coral reefs, like caverns under the water. Her voice was the voice of the sea, and yet her words were the words of Peregrine's own language, spoken carefully and slowly, as if she were not used to them. "Please, kind sir," she said, her green eyes filling with sea-green salt tears. "Please, kind sir, put me back in the water. I want to go home. Please, please, kind sir." Imploringly, she held out her little white hands, whose fingers were tipped with pale, shell-pink nails. Peregrine had a kind heart and was sorry to see how distressed his lovely mermaid was. It would have been fun to take her home. It would have been very pleasant to have an admiring praise of the other villagers. It would have been very fine to have the money she would fetch if he could sell her, for he was a very poor man, and lately had earned even less money than usual. He hesitated. "If you will let me go, kind sir," said the mermaid, trying to smile at him through her tears, "you will not be sorry. For should you ever be in danger at sea, I will help you. I would cry out to you 3 times to warn you to return to land. Please, kind sir, put me back into the water." She needn't have pleaded with him so earnestly, for Peregrine had already made up his mind. "Of course I'll put you back," he said. "I'm only sorry that I've distressed you." He helped her out of the net, a difficult business because she slithered about so, and then he helped her over the side of the boat. She dived into the sea, sending up a crystal spray of water with a flip of her green and blue tail, and then she turned her lovely face towards Peregrine as he began to take up the oars to row for the shore. "Thank you, kind sir," she sang out in her voice of the sea. "And don't forget I shall call out 3 times if ever you are in danger, and you must return to land immediately when I do so." Peregrine waved a cheery hand at her. He was sad to have lost her, but glad that he had done so, as she had asked, and that she was now happily on her way home at the bottom of the sea, just as he was about to go home to safe, firm land. Some months later, when Peregrine had almost forgotten about his mermaid, he was once again at sea in his fishing boat, and once again the sea was in a friendly mood, or so it seemed to him, for the sun shone and the waters were calm. He sat in his boat dreaming about nothing very much in particular, when he heard a distant cry of "Peregrine! Peregrine!" He looked round, but he couldn't see other boats nearby. He told himself he must have imagined it. Then he heard again, a little nearer this time, "Peregrine! Peregrine!" There could be no mistake, someone was calling him. And where had he heard that sweet voice before? Suddenly he remembered it was the voice of the mermaid. She had said that she would call him 3 times if he were in danger. Surely he shouldn't be in danger now. The weather was perfect, and the sea was calm, and she'd only called out twice, so perhaps this was not the promised warning call after all. "Peregrine! Peregrine!" the voice called out again. This time it was much nearer, although he could see no sign of the mermaid even now. "Ship your nets, Peregrine, and return to shore. Ship your nets and return to shore." The mermaid had called out 3 times, and the last time there could be no doubt of her warning. Peregrine looked up at the clear blue sky. He looked down at the clear blue sea. Could the mermaid be teasing him? There was no sign of a storm, and he would look a fool returning to shore in the middle of a fine morning like this. What could he say when he was asked why he had returned? "The mermaid told me to return." Why, he would be laughed at if he said such a thing. And yet the mermaid had appeared grateful to him. She'd promised to warn him if danger approached, and she'd seemed sincere. He remembered clearly her pale, serious face with the great green eyes. Slowly he hauled in his nets and set the boat towards the shore. Slowly he rowed back, still not sure he was doing the right thing. And then he was halfway there. He noticed the sky had darkened, that great black clouds had rolled over the blue sky, and the golden sun turning the bright morning into darkest night. It looked as if the mermaid might have been right, and Peregrine now quickened his rowing. It was hard to move the boat through the water, for the sea had in a second become a heaving, angry mass of enormous waves. Peregrine struggled on. This was as bad as any storm at sea he had ever experienced, and he was afraid it would be worse yet. It seemed to him hours before he reached the shore, and as he dragged his boat to safety, he looked out to that part of the sea where he'd been fishing, where the mermaid called him. The lightning flashed. The wind roared, and the waves were higher than the tallest mountains in Wales. Peregrine's fishing boat could never have battled against such overwhelming odds, but would have been sucked down, Peregrine with it, to a watery grave. How thankful he was that he'd heeded the mermaid's warning. "Thank you, little mermaid," he murmured. "Thank you for saving my life." Above the crash and the thunder of the raging storm, he thought he heard a sweet little sea voice crying out, "Goodbye, Peregrine, goodbye."